Hey, I spent $4,000 and flew all the way to Singapore for an in-person VIP workshop with Chris Do, founder of the Future, and I really just got to ask him one question. In this video, I'm going to be sharing if it was worth it and all the notes from the day I spent hanging out with him and 20 other entrepreneurs. So, first of all, if you don't know who Chris Do is, he's one of my favorite entrepreneurs. He's the founder of the Futur and also is really like just a brilliant marketer and an expert at personal branding. You know, he's built his YouTube channel to over 2 million subscribers, has millions of followers on his other channels, and really, you know, he's like the #1 brand in his niche, which is creative freelancers. So I mainly wanted to learn, you know, how's he doing his content, his brand, and how did he become the #1 brand in his space. Other than that, he built his education business to $5 million a year without a single paid advertisement. He did that all purely organically, so he's really the master of social media, marketing, and organics, so that's the main thing I wanted to learn from him. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is going through all of my notes. I took like 20 pages of notes from the event, and I'm just going to be going through them like line by line and sharing every nugget I learned, because not only did I get to learn from my question I asked, but I got to learn from all the questions the other entrepreneurs asked. Now, this was a really cool workshop because there was literally 0 slides. It was just Chris in front of a whiteboard taking questions from each of the other 20 entrepreneurs and just answering and really just diving into each person's business in depth to get their question answered and to help them grow. So it was really just more of like an intimate, private business scaling workshop. So I have tons of notes and I'm just gonna go through them step by step. So I have notes here on branding and identity, storytelling and messaging, copywriting, also like the business operations side of the business. So I have my notes in 5 different categories here. You know, I learned about branding and storytelling, messaging, copywriting, how Chris scales his businesses, and a couple of things he's done to basically build his team out to be able to grow to $5 million a year, and a whole lot more. So let's get into it. First things first, let's cover some notes on branding and identity. Chris is a really brilliant marketer when it comes to just like getting really deep into the actual brand, and that's why he's built the biggest one, right? A lot of marketers just rush to like tactics and systems and funnels, but if you don't really have a clear identity for your brand from the beginning, you're going to be really it's going to be hard for people to see how are you different from everyone else, right? Especially in how competitive the online space is nowadays, right? But before Chris built the Future, he had built an award-winning agency that helped Fortune 100 companies like Coca-Cola and Nike, with advertisements and commercials actually. So he really learned a lot from the corporate world in terms of how some of the biggest companies on the planet approach branding. And I was really excited to learn around that. So here's a couple of quick branding tips. First, you have to start with what makes you weird and what makes you different. So whether you're building your personal brand or your business brand, you have to think, the first original question is, what makes us different? And really, what makes us weird? Like, what's something that unique or strange about us or strange about yourself that you can emulate, right? So for example, one of the other founders' questions was, hey, how do I make my business stand out? And the first question Chris asked was, what makes you weird as a person, right? Because ultimately, your business brand can stem from the founder's brand, right? And really, it was such a powerful question to me because it's really about, that's what's going to get you to something that's original, right? So we actually did this exercise where everyone in the room went around just sharing things that make them weird. And that was really really got our brains going on how can we, what can we build our personal brand around and our business brand around and focus on things that are unique to us, because when you share things that are deeply personal, unique, or just weird about you or weird about your company or your team, anyone else who also shares those quirks is going to really relate to you, right? That's just a really great question to get kind of your gears turning in your head. Then beyond that, the next thing covered was, it's not enough just to say you want to be different. Your business actually has to be different, right? Because as Chris was asking this entrepreneur questions about her business, hey, what makes you different? What's different in your process or this or that? She was giving pretty generic answers, right? So you can't really try to be different in your marketing or your positioning or your branding unless you actually have something different about your business. So that's why you want to really start with the process of self-discovery and think what is something that we do? And every business, no matter what your business is, you probably already have something that makes you different and makes you unique. You just might not realize that it's special, or you might think everyone else does it. But you have to start from actually figuring out what actually makes us different. And then the marketing and the messaging or the branding stems from that, right? But a lot of marketers, I think, rush just to picking a cool name or just some flashy words to make them different. And really, you have to actually start with, what actually is different about our product, our customer experience, or our story, right? So here's a couple of other questions or prompts you can ask yourself or go over with your team to figure out how you're going to make your brand, really stand out as that #1 business in the marketplace, right? So first, ask yourself things like, what are you standing for? What do you believe? Because you really have to pick a strong point of view. Chris also emphasized the importance of having an enemy. Your brand should have an enemy, and that enemy can be a common competitor, or it could just be the way that people are doing things that's different from how you do things, right? Maybe the way that your customers are solving their problem now, which is the wrong way, before they find your solutions. You really got to have a strong point of view or an enemy. Basically, there's no success in the middle. Any popular personal brand or business brand stands for something clearly. And people can either say, no, I completely disagree with that, or yes, I completely agree with that. And you have to be, that polarizing, right? If you're just in the middle, you blend in with everybody else, right? And people scroll past you on social media. Aside from getting clear on your beliefs and what you stand for and who the enemy is, who the enemy character is, you also want to think about like, what's your purpose? What's your bigger vision for the brand, right? Because you have some purpose or you have some vision for your brand, but if you're not communicating that in your marketing, then you're just going to sound like every other service, right? So think about really like why you started the business, what the overall mission was, what you wanted to create in the world that wasn't there, and that's got to be the forefront of your branding. Now I know a lot of this branding stuff can really seem kind of like high level or really amorphous, but ultimately when you're clear on these things for your brand, when you develop a strong brand identity, who you are, what makes you different, what makes you better, and what the enemy is, right? What is the status quo that you're challenging, and what's the bigger vision or mission behind what you're doing? That really informs all of your decisions, right? Like your product, your marketing, your HR, who you hire, the culture of the company. So I find this stuff is really, really important because it actually just gives you kind of like a compass for how you do everything in your business, and you create that uniform, business identity. Getting more tactical, we talked about branding, but we also talked a lot about storytelling and messaging. And Chris is definitely a brilliant storyteller. Again, he worked with some of the biggest companies in the entire world on creating stories and commercials through their marketing, right? First, there's one book that Chris recommended that I'm about to pick up, which is the 22 Rules of Storytelling by Pixar. He's definitely very well read, but he recommended this as the number one book to basically tell better stories in your marketing. But beyond that, aside from picking up the book, here's a few quick tips. So first of all, you want to drop people right into the action. Basically, think about it. We're living in a world where everything just flies by you on social media and you're inundated with messages, right? First, few seconds of whatever your content is, whether it's an email or a post or a video or a podcast, whatever it is, you got to drop people right into the action when you're telling a story, right? You don't want to have all this lead up, right? Think about most of the movies you watch, or really all the good movies you watch, right? Usually in the first minute, something crazy could be happening or something different or something weird is happening, right? So you have to basically get people right into the story. You don't want to just have all this build up, right? And then just get to the main dramatic point midway through. Think about it. Sometimes books do a really bad job of this. You ever read a book and you feel like the first chapter was just all of this fluff and build up into what the book's going to be about? You don't want to do that. You want to drop people right into the action. So a good example of this is you can take something, if you're trying to craft a story, right? You can take something from the middle or from the end of the story. Often it's the end, but it doesn't give away the whole thing. And that can be the first beginning part of the story, right? So you've seen this a lot in movies where maybe they foreshadow a scene or something crazy happens in the beginning, but really that's later in the story, but it's just kind of brought to the front, right? So another way is to drop people right into the action. But basically the hook is the most important. And if you're doing a storytelling format, give people some glimpse right away of the most dramatic moment or something that's happening. And then you can kind of start from the beginning to explain how you're leading up to that. So basically just think about the climax or the most tension there is in your story, the most exciting moment, and just put that right in the beginning. Now, what else do we got? So back to rules of storytelling, struggles matters more than successes. If you look on social media, everybody tells stories about their successes, their case studies, their business wins, their milestone. And while that's great, people don't really relate to that, right? What makes any story interesting is the struggles. It's the conflict. It's, I struggled with this and then I got this, right? And if you think about every movie has the main character in some terrible conflict, right? It's that's the hero's journey, right? Imagine you watched a movie and, the main character started out and he's got a great life, he's got a great job, he's got a great family and wife or whatever it is, and everything's going perfect, and then that's just the whole movie. You're just watching his life. We would all tune out immediately, right? Every single movie you watch, there's some conflict with the main story, conflict with the main character. So, how can you do that in your own marketing, in your own storytelling, right? Especially if you have a personal brand. If you only talk about your successes, then you're really going to tune a lot of people away, because when you share a struggle, people can really relate to you, they can see themselves in you, and they want to follow along to see how you've solved that struggle, right? So very simple practical tip for this is anytime you have a lesson that you want to teach on social media, so if you're making an email, a post, a video, and you have a lesson that you want to teach, you can wrap that lesson into a story, right? And that story can start with, hey, I struggled with this, or hey, my client struggled with this before they found this lesson, which got them to this result, right? Because people want to know really what you went through, not just what worked, right? They want to know, they want to follow you on the whole journey, right? And that's going to add more originality and more life into your content, right? Versus just sharing, 5 tips for XYZ that made me get, this result. Now, getting more deep into copywriting, one really great framework that Chris shared was the ROT framework, which is ROT, if that's easy to remember. And it's results, objection, time. So one of the other members for their part of the workshop, their question was, how do I describe myself in my bio on LinkedIn, right? She didn't really have her elevator pitch, and it took a lot of digging because we kept asking her like, hey, what do you do? How do you describe your work? And she did some sort of, life coaching, but it was very vague and just sounded like everyone else, right? To really get to the heart of what you do and how you can communicate your value in 1 to 2 sentences, which is so important because every business needs a value proposition, right? You need to be able to say in 2 sentences what you do and why someone should care. And that's used everywhere, on social media, on your sales pages, on your videos, when you introduce yourself at a speaking event, podcast, whatever it is, right? So results, objection, time frame. Results is I help, like what do you help your clients do, right? If you're a fitness coach, is it lose weight, right? If you're a business coach or you're an agency, is it get more leads or scale the business or hire the team, or really like the evolution of that, which is like, getting more time back or making more money or saving money or whatever it is, right? So get to the end result. And then objections is, the thing that your customer doesn't want to do. So in my case, results would be, being that I run a cold email and LinkedIn agency, we generate leads for our clients. Result would be, we help our clients, double their revenue. Or I could say we help our clients get another 30 qualified sales calls a month so they can fill their sales pipeline, right? So you start with a result, and then objection would be the thing they don't want to do. So in my case, that would be we help our clients 2x their revenue without having to spend a big budget on paid ads or any budget on paid ads, right? Because we give them another way to generate leads that's less costly, right? And then time is the time frame, right? If you can give a time-bound result, that's always going to really draw people in because they can start to visualize it and see themselves getting that result in the future. So for me, that could be, we help our clients double their revenue within 6 months without paid ads. Or I could say without complex funnels or without having to hire, salespeople and setters. I can just think about all the things that people don't want when they, that drives them to want, our service or this, channel in the first place of cold email, right? So whatever that could be, that could be, if you're a fitness coach, it could be we help our clients lose weight in 60 days, without sacrificing the foods they love, right? Something along those lines. Now, it doesn't have to be always in that order of ROT. You can mix and match these in any order that you like. And this is a really cool framework because, like, no matter what you do, there's a way to explain it in this way. And this is such a powerful way to explain what you do because it's so specific and so tangible. One of the biggest problems I see, with other business owners is, they're just so vague in explaining what they do, and it's hard for people to understand like what they actually get or what the value is, right? But this is just, cuts right through that. So ROC framework, remember that. And also, when it comes to copywriting, Chris's creative process is to generate like 20 to 30 ideas, right? So while he was helping that one business owner with coming up with their value proposition, he had her come up with like 10 different examples of a result she provides, 10 different examples of an objection or like a thing that our target market doesn't want, 10 different time-bound examples, right? And then, from there, we were all able to kind of like pick and choose and mix and match the best ones. And I think that's, like a great process for copywriting, but also just for any creative process, right? Whenever I'm doing anything creative, I like to have a lot of ideas. So let's say that I'm coming up with a strategy for a client for their outbound campaigns. We'll come up with 10 strategies, then we'll pick the best one. So this is really good because a lot of times when you're generating ideas, I find that, you still have to like get through the crappy ideas first, right? Usually the first or second idea that comes to your mind isn't really very good. So the more that you kind of get into the creative flow, you come up with better ideas. And then also, then you have the best ideas to choose from, right? So if you come up with 10 ideas, you can really pick and choose the best one and cherry pick the best one, right? It's kind of like whenever I'm writing, a lot of times the first like intro isn't really very good, and then it starts getting really good by the middle because I'm kind of in the zone, right? So yeah, same goes for creating ideas. And whenever you're coming up with headlines, whenever you're coming up with a value proposition, or let's say it's the name of like a YouTube video or the name of an offer or a product or a bonus, come up with a lot of different ideas for it and pick and choose the best one. Let's see what else we got. All right, so here's a couple of other rapid fire tips for copywriting and content writing online. So first, back to the creative process. Generate ideas freely. Like we spoke about, have 20, 30 ideas, but then don't judge them when they're coming out. You just want to analyze them separately. And I found this to be really helpful because if I'm writing ideas, but then I'm judging them or I'm thinking like, is this practical or what are people going to think or is this going to work? That really kills the creative process, right? Because you're using a different part of your brain when you're going into like that rational analysis mode, right? So first, brain dump a lot of ideas. And again, this is about copywriting, but it goes for anything in general that's creative. Brain dump a lot of ideas and then judge them and pick and choose them separately. So that's really, really important. Now, there's a couple of different really like simple tactics he gave for writing as well. One is use alliteration, rhyming, or repetition whenever you can, right? That's why you see a lot of frameworks that's like, maybe there's like an acronym or it's like the 555 method or whatever. Or anytime you could just use alliteration in your writing as well. These things are all like really catch people's attention because they're very memorable. For example, we brand one of our outbound methods, one of our marketing strategies as the outbound organic sales system, OOSS. Really just, rolls off the tongue and helps stick in people's memory a little bit more, right? And with that said, use metaphors and analogies as much as you can. Something really clicks in the brain when we have like a picture in our mind of something else that's relatable. So metaphors or analogy are always great. And simple tip for this is you can take AI and you can take ChatGPT, Claude, whatever you use, feed it a post of yours or an email or whatever it is, whatever you're writing or whatever you're making, and just say, hey, give me a couple of analogies and metaphors that explain the lessons in this, right? And that's really going to land. Now, besides that, another practical tip for writing is use visual language. So another practical tip for copywriting is use visual language. So there was one other business owner in the room that does like corporate consulting, and she helps businesses with change management. Like she helps big companies navigate like a big company change they're going to. And a common one right now is AI, right? So she's helping businesses prepare for this wave of AI coming and how it's going to disrupt their industry. So Chris's example was, she could use the words of like an iceberg, right? Like, hey, we're going to help you avoid this upcoming iceberg to your business, right? And that's just an example of using visual language, because when we think about iceberg, we think about the Titanic, we think about things crashing and dying, right? So that can, in her example, she can use that to represent, the fear or this change that's coming up for a lot of these businesses. But you can use any word or any example. The point is, if you use visual language, that really kind of brings your writing to life and helps people, draw on associations they have in their mind, right? So that's a really cool one as well. Now, beyond that, we talked about high-level branding. We talked about some tactical copywriting and creative ideas tips for the creative process. Now let's go more into the actual content social media strategy, because I was really curious to learn, like, how does Chris structure his content? How did he get millions of followers and millions of YouTube subscribers, right? He shared that there's two things specifically that helped him get to 2 million YouTube subscribers that he's applied to all of his content as a whole. So two things that have really, really helped him is, one, respect the audience's time, right? So if you look at any of his videos or any of his content, whether you're on his email list or you look at his posts, and really you'll see this you'll see this with other creators too. That's any other creator that's really successful will have the same thing, right? So there's two things that Chris attributed his YouTube success to, right? And really all of his social media organic growth. And number one is respecting the audience's time. If you, for example, if you're doing videos and you ramble in the intro for 5 or 10 minutes about what the video is going to be about, and you don't actually get down to like what it's about really quickly or get into the value, then you're not really respecting the audience's time, right? And just look at your own habits, right? If you're reading a post on social media, listening to a podcast, or watching a video, if you haven't gotten something useful out of it in the first few minutes, then you're just going to keep moving on, right? And the way that you respect the audience's time is really by planning and preparation, right? So some of the, back to the example of videos, some of the best YouTubers or some of the most successful channels, they talk about how they spend so much time planning their videos, because the way that it works is like the more time you spend planning, the shorter and more impactful the content can be. If you write a social media post and it's really, really long and you don't really take time to edit it, then it's quicker for you, but it's longer for the audience, and then they're just going to move on, right? So it's kind of like the more time you put into the content, the less time the audience has to put into getting the value from it, because you're really going to work more on editing it, right? Put your time into planning, strategizing, and polishing your content, whatever it is. And that's just really a matter of respecting their time so that they can get the value very, very quickly. The second tip that made the biggest difference for him and his team on social media that allowed him to build such a huge brand online was not mixing selling and marketing in the same content. Meaning, either give value in your video or sell, right? So Chris shared the 911 rule, and see, back to how we talked about using alliteration and repetition, right? The 911 rule is 9 pieces of value content, 1 personal story, and 1 sales related post. So basically, like on Chris's social media, like they used to mix them, when he first started his YouTube and his other channels, he used to mix and match these a lot, where like every video would have like value, but then also be selling a lot, like selling his offer at the end, right? And he always found that, he lost a lot of the audience then, and this really didn't help grow the channel. So once his YouTube channel started to take off, because I saw them very quickly go to 2 million subscribers over like a matter of just a few years, once things started to take off, it was because they made this one big change where if they're making value content, they're only making value content, and they're not like selling their service at the end. And if they are going to sell their service, then the post is just going to be about like, here's this offer, here's this workshop I'm doing, here's this thing we're selling, go get it here, right? So basically he separated value-based content versus sales-based content. And if you can remember the 911 rule, that's a good ratio that you can follow as well. But I love that tip, because like this is probably happening to you. You've probably felt weird when you're making like a value post, and then you also have to like sell something at the end, or make an offer, or promote something that you just released or whatever. Sometimes it just kind of feels weird, and then the audience can feel it too. So I love this tip, because if you follow that, then you can just basically make content purely for the sake of giving, and really be in that headspace, rather than thinking like, hey, how am I going to sell my offer at the end of this, right? So I think it allows for a lot more authentic content. Other than that, quick tips for content strategy and how they create such banger posts one after the other is one, lists are always great. listicles like 10 steps to do this, or 10 common mistakes, or 10 tips to get XYZ results. Those always are a tried and true format, so like always be doing those in your content. Other than that, also keep a swipe file. A swipe file is basically people, any like marketing that you like, right? Whether it's videos, whether it's headlines or funnels, like whatever you do, whatever type of marketing you're doing, you should always have examples to draw from. So in Chris's example, there's a popular advertising magazine, a French magazine, that shares like the best media from around the world, the best video, the best commercial, the best article, things like that, right? The best photography. And he just basically, buys that magazine, cuts out the ones he likes, and he actually has a physical binder. So whenever he's stuck on coming up with a new campaign or a new idea or a new piece of content, he'll just look through that to get inspiration. And you can have this, digitally. So for me, I run a cold email agency, and every time I receive a cold email pitch that I like a really well-written email, I store it in a folder in my Gmail. And then anytime I'm stuck for inspiration, I can just look at that and I can see like, what did I like about this post? And then just from looking at your swipe file, you can get ideas pretty quickly. So whatever channel you're doing marketing on, find other examples of good marketing on that channel. It can be in your industry, but also I'd recommend having things not in your industry, because when you have examples from completely different industries, that's when you can really, really get creative and kind of mix and match ideas from other spaces. All right, last quick tips on content that I learned from the workshop and from chatting with Chris, and then we'll move on to some other things like, business operations, scaling, pricing, and more. So really just kind of to wrap this up, be bold, pick one side, have a contrarian point of view, right? Don't be in the middle, right? You want to really have a firm point of view that people can say, yes, I agree, or no, I completely disagree. Don't be in the middle trying to please everyone. Lean into your opinion and stand. That's what makes content memorable. And also, for short form video tips, short form video is working great right now. TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts. Usually our shorts get way more views than our actual videos, so it seems like YouTube is really pushing it, but it's also what people are very tuned into right now, right? So some quick tips for short form is definitely script them. It's better than winging it. Like me doing this long form YouTube video, that's going to be like probably 30, 40 minutes by the time I'm done. I'm not scripting every second of it, right? I have an outline. I have like some notes I want to go over here on my laptop, but ultimately you don't want to actually script the full thing, because that's just, not really practical and would make the whole long form video feel pretty robotic, right? But short form, because you only have like a minute, that should be scripted to a T, because you really want to take the time to like perfect every line and word and be very intentional about it. So with longer content, you like longer video content, you don't need to script the whole thing unless it's really your style. With short form videos, you should always be scripting the hook and really, really taking like most of the time just to work on those, first few lines, right? Also, if you're doing video content, do one cut per line. That's going to take more time, more editing, but it's going to really make your videos very, very engaging, especially if you're doing any sort of like vlog or anything like that, or any behind the scenes videos. And also back to a swipe file, a great YouTuber to follow for video storytelling and video production is Gawx, Gawx, and his YouTube videos. He spends like 300 hours on one YouTube video, but just like the camera work, cinematography is so great. You don't need to be at that level, right? But at least you can pick up a couple tips and like have some inspiration when you need it, right? So actually, there's one more tip here on the creative process that I wanted to cover. Just realized I forgot this before I move on, but this is so awesome. So I actually mentioned a little bit before around finding examples from other industries, not just your competitors, for inspiration. And Chris shared one example of like a brainstorming process where you find one really successful brand, right? One really successful business that's not in your industry. You unpack what made their brand work well, what made their marketing campaign work well, and then you unpack how you can do that in your own business. So we looked at businesses like Minecraft, right? We looked at Netflix, Duolingo, and also Microsoft and Apple. And we figured out, so we unpacked together like what made these businesses so successful, what made their products so special, what made their brand stand out. For example, with Netflix, it was really about simplicity and convenience. Instead of having to go to the movies or go to Blockbuster to rent something, you can just have anything you need on demand at your home, right? So what can you do in your own business to create that same feeling? Because even if you're not a subscription service or a movie service, you can still take that process of like, what can I do to make things more convenient for my customers, more flexible, more on demand for them versus what everyone else is doing in my space. Or for Minecraft, a big thing about Minecraft was that it was just so different, like the graphics from every other game, because as video games were getting very, very sophisticated, very, very advanced in their graphics, Minecraft had this like simple kind of nostalgic feeling of like these really crappy graphics, right? And really, really basic. So I think there was like nostalgia in that because it probably brought people back to how video games were in the 20 years ago. But also it was just different. Like it just had an aesthetic that was completely different. So for example, could you add nostalgia into your product or your marketing or your brand? Or could you just add something to the aesthetic or the feeling of it that's just completely different from all of your competitors? And Duolingo was another example. So we unpacked Duolingo's success, the language app, and there was two things that made them go viral. One, they did tons and tons of influencer partnerships. That's really how they became so successful. And second is they had a brand character. They had like an actual brand character, this weird little bird thing in this green costume. And they had this actual character in real life where they had like a mascot that would go around and like be part of all these influencers' videos and partnerships they did, right? So they had a really cool brand character, and it's even like in the app. So even if you're not a language-based learning app, even if you're not an app at all, can you have a brand character? And also, how can you partner with influencers in the way that they did, right? So just as an example, you can find a big company in any niche or a really successful particular campaign or ad and think like, what worked around that and how can I use it in my space? And this is such a great formula for innovation, because then you're not just doing what your competitors are doing. You're taking completely different insights from a completely different space and making it your own. So I really loved that exercise. Someone asked like, hey, how do I build a successful education business, right? Chris is doing $5+ million a year just selling courses and workshops, right? And I thought that, this conversation was going to go down the direction of like, funnels and offers and like how to price your courses and blah, blah, blah. But he actually took it to a completely different direction, which really surprised me. He went right into like how to actually teach good educational content. So if you run an education business, or if you want to add like courses, workshops, or like, monetize your expertise, this is really useful. But even if you don't, actually sell information or sell your expertise and you don't want to, you can still take these tips, because really like, what are we doing on content and social media? We're teaching, right? So these same tips will help you actually just teach better and get more views and, more engagement, and as a result, more leads. So he shared some really good tips from like actually teaching. And there was a couple of teachers in the room, because I mentioned there was that other member of the workshop who ran a math school. And we actually went around to everyone that had a professional background in teaching and found like the best formulas for teaching really, really good content and giving people a really good experience. And I love that we went this direction because, like offers, pricing, funnel, that's all great. But it was really interesting to me how the first thing Chris's mind went to when someone said, how do I build a good education business? The first thing his mind went to was like, teach better, right? Which really boils down to like, make the best product, right? So it really shows you, like what his values and priorities are. And to me, the meta lesson there is like, focus on making the best product you can. No matter what you sell, if you start with making the product, the customer experience better, then it's always going to be a lot easier than, just trying to market and sell your way to the top, right? But also, of course, do that too. But anyway, specifically on how to create good educational content, one is follow the framework of 5. So no matter what you teach, right, you could break it into 5 components, right? So let's say, so we did this with a health coach in the room, right? There was like a private health coach in the room, and we broke down his business. And the 5 things for him on what he teaches, what he works with his clients is gut health, blood work, eating, so like diet, exercise, and sleep. And he broke them down in order. So, okay, now we've taken what he does with his clients, and there's 5 different things. So if he's going to make a course, he can make a course about each one of those 5 areas, or one course that covers all 5. Now, within those 5, within sleep, there's 5 factors, right? Like having a consistent bedtime and wake-up routine, not having alcohol, not having caffeine before bed, right? And with exercise, there's 5 things as well. And even within those 5, you can kind of break down 5 more under each, right? So you can get really, really granular with it. But basically, this is important because people retain structured information better. And also, it's going to kind of help you take like everything that you're teaching in your content or in your products if you're actually like selling your information. It's going to take everything you teach and kind of make it more like structured, easier for people to understand, and really easier for you to understand, right? Because when you're an expert at something, it can be really hard to actually teach things and break things down because you just know everything and everything kind of is like natural to you by now. But when you're teaching it, like someone has to have a structure they can kind of wrap their head around and build a mental model of, right? So I love that rule of 5. That's really awesome. And you can apply that to anything, right? So like there was a Facebook ads expert in the room. So the rule of 5 is, hey, what are the 5 most important things with Facebook ads, right? Targeting, messaging, the pixel setup, etc. And within those, right, within the messaging, there can be 5 things that go into good copywriting, right? So it really just kind of goes on and on. And this is basically your content pillars. So the main 5 things around, your expertise, those are your content pillars. And then the 5 pieces below that, and then, below that again, right? So like going into more fractal with that. That's all like the different posts you can make, the different ideas you can share, etc. Other lessons on how to create really, really good educational content is, first, we talked about this before, but metaphors, analogies, and visuals. This is the best way to explain a complex idea. Also, be as concise as possible, right? So make your content shorter, then make it shorter. So like honestly, like most people would be happy to pay more money if your course was 3 hours versus 100 hours, because really it's faster, right? And just because something takes more time, just because you have like a longer course, material, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily better. Usually that means that it's worse because you didn't take the time to really, really like edit it down and make it concise. So same goes for content. Whenever I write something, whether it's an email campaign, a social media post, I always take my first draft and I think like, how can I make it shorter? And a great tip for you here is take your content, throw it in AI, and just say, hey, make this 50% shorter while preserving all of the key information. And you'll just get something way more concise and well written. So conciseness is key. Always make it shorter. And 2 other tips around creating really good educational content and being a great teacher is 1, make the learning fun. Can you gamify your learning, right? Can you just make it fun in any way? And then 2nd is student engagement is key. So, this is kind of hard to do when you're doing like one-to-many content, like making a video like this or writing a post for social media, but you can still do it by having like a question. Like, that's why a lot of times you see something that starts, you read something and there's actually a question inside of it, or maybe the first line is a question, because it kind of draws you in, it gets you thinking, and it gets you engaged. So you can definitely replicate this in your content, but also it's easier to do if you're running like a workshop, if you have a coaching program, or if you're working with clients one-on-one. You have to really pay attention to, are they engaged? And if they're not, like ask them questions and make them part of it. And you have to really kind of keep them in, because think about school, right? Back when we were in school, if the teacher was just talking for an hour and a half and they weren't involved in the classroom, we'd all tune out, right? So student engagement is key. All right, now last, we went deep into marketing. We even went into, teaching and how to make really good content that actually helps people so that they come back for more. Now I'm just gonna go through some miscellaneous tips around pricing, offers, business scaling, and a few other random areas. So these are the last parts of my notes, and I hope you guys have enjoyed the video so far. By the way, I can actually give you the notes. There's a link in the description. I compiled all these notes onto like a Google Doc. I think it's like 17 pages by now. So if you want to actually get my detailed notes from this event and just read through it and be able to refer back to it, then click the link in the description below, because I figured this would be useful for you all. So I took all my crappy, handwriting and chicken scratch notes, and I put them into a nice organized Google Doc for you all. So definitely grab that down below. And on to the last section. Let's see what we got. So one of the topics of the workshop was, how do I sell to higher end clients? So someone asked like, hey, I want to sell to larger clients who could pay me like 5 times the rate I'm charging now. The first thing is you have to decide and commit to one, because selling to lower end clients with lower price point versus selling to higher end clients with a higher price point, they both work and you can build a business out of each, but you can't be wishy-washy on both. You have to really commit to one, because if you are going to sell to higher end clients, then your branding, your positioning, your messaging, your prices, and your delivery and your team has to all be built around that. You have to really kind of build the whole business and build the whole marketing like around that. That's why you hear all this talk around the importance of customer avatars and brand identity, because really like you have to be clear on like who you're selling to and what you're selling, because everything else kind of flows down from that, right? Everything else revolves around that decision. So first, be clear if that's actually what you want, because it means changing up your business, changing up your offers, messaging, etc. to match that, right? Second is higher end clients buy a little bit differently. Usually they buy a lot quicker. They're not usually going to sit through like long webinars, right? Usually they just want to know like the facts, the pricing, and really it's more about trust, right? So one of the other business owners in the room was a private health coach for billionaires, right? And he was charging like 6 to 8K a month for one-on-one health coaching. And he shared his story of how like he had to work with these higher end clients, and the biggest thing he found was that they really, really value trust. And it makes sense, because rich people are used to people trying to like take advantage of them, right? So they're naturally very, very skeptical, right? So trust is important. So social proof, case studies, word of mouth is absolutely key, right? So if you're trying to sell to larger clients, that's always going to be the case. I find this too, like whenever I'm selling into a larger company in a B2B scenario, they're always wondering like, who have you worked with, right? So if you can land a really big name client, a big brand in your niche, for example, if you're B2B, that's going to carry more weight than anything to get you more big name clients, right? Because they want to have that trust. So that's one thing. Trust and social proof is absolutely key if you're trying to scale up and charge higher prices. The second thing we covered around charging higher prices and moving up market is that you have to actually raise your value. So it's not enough to say, hey, I want to charge 10K a month for my marketing agency. You have to provide 10K worth of value. So back to that example of the other guy in the room that was charging 6 to 8K a month for one-on-one coaching. He didn't just randomly come up with that price. He was constantly investing in himself, going to events, learning more, buying, coaching programs, masterminds, etc. around the health niche. He was constantly like up-leveling himself, and then as a result, he was able to charge more, right? So you can't just charge more. You have to actually increase your value at the same time. So if and he was sharing as well, like it's really hard to work with these higher end clients. They're very demanding. They expect a lot more naturally, right? They should for what they're paying. So, you also have to make sure that you're ready for that you can give them enough value, and then also you want to deal with those, those types of clients as well. So, because again, like there's more pressure that comes with it when you're charging higher price points. So I think that's really cool insight that we spoke about, because I think there's a lot of advice going around on social media that's like charge more, raise your prices, but nobody's talking about the fact that you actually have to deliver more and be ready for that, right? And then last thing Chris shared on pricing philosophy is Ultimately, there's infinite prices you can charge. There's no such thing as charging too much. There's only just not delivering enough value, right? So because there's infinite value you can give to someone, right, there's really infinite prices you can give. Like I know there's one business coach that charges $40,000 an hour, and people pay it. And that wasn't like me misspeaking. He literally charges $40,000 an hour, and he has big companies that pay it, right? So there's no limit to what you can charge, and there's really no rules around pricing. And this to me was really useful to hear, because sometimes I get caught up in like looking at my competitors and seeing what they're pricing. And I know that if they're between here and here, then maybe I have to be like somewhere in the middle. But there's literally no rules. We make up the rules as we go as entrepreneurs, right? So there's no rules around what you can price or what you can deliver or the format it's in. There's just, all that matters in the customer's mind is, am I getting more value than what I'm paying for, right? So you can really charge whatever you want. It's just about giving the value. And Chris's advice here, the main thing he shared was, don't worry so much about what your product costs or what the price is. Just focus on making giving people an insane amount of value and making your offer so irresistible that the price becomes irrelevant. So if you're getting a lot of price resistance on your offer, and a lot of people are saying this is too much, it's probably not like your sales skills. It's probably just the fact that you need to make your offer more valuable. And then my question for Chris was really like, how can I scale my operations? Because we have 8 people in the team now, and I want to build something similar to what he did with the Futur, where he built an education business on the side of his agency, and he built his team up to like 20 25 people. So I was wondering, hey, like as I'm going through this next level of growth, how can I be prepared to build my team up and build the operations out, right? Because going from like 8 employees to like 20, because I used to manage like 20 employees at my old corporate job, and going from that level is like a whole different business at that point, because you're not dealing with everyone directly. So his tip for me was that every employee should give you 5 times the value, meaning like if you're paying an employee 80 grand a year, they should be making you 400 grand a year top line to the business, right? And I thought that was really cool, because it really got me thinking like, hey, which one of my team members is not really pulling their weight? So I love that. So that's really a great way just to measure and manage your team members. You have to make sure that they're giving value. And just because someone's not in sales, like even if your team member's in delivery or accounting or whatever, they should still be able to either make or save you 5 times what they're worth. So that was a really cool way to like measure employees in a way that I hadn't heard before. That was really awesome. And other than that, you really have to mind your capacity as you scale. So he was sharing that basically capacity affects confidence, right? If your team is stretched too thin, if you have more clients than you handle, if you have too many projects going on at once, you're going to have very low confidence. It's going to affect your sales, because you're not going to transfer that confidence to your clients, because to me, like sales is all about a transfer of energy. If you have high conviction, high confidence, then they will too. So basically like your confidence level in your business is essentially tied to your capacity and how much extra bandwidth you and your team have. And I thought that was really powerful as well. Also, he shared with me that, for me to grow where I want to grow to next, I'm going to have to get myself out of the marketing fully. And he recommended for me to hire like a producer type role, like someone young out of college with a media and film background, to basically take over, my YouTube channel, my podcast, and my social media, and have that like professional, media background to, take it to the next level, right? So just as we got into what I need to scale my business, I shared that like marketing was a constraint for me, because I do a lot of content and there's only one person that could do content. But his advice for me was get someone that can do all of the other side of things with the content, right? Like the direction, the editing, the organizing, the formatting, the posting, the analytics, the research, all of that. So while I can't, get someone else to do the content for me, I can have someone else that does all the things that surround the content. So he helped me a lot with like, who should I hire? What should I pay them? And what sort of background should I look for? But anyways, that's it for today's video. That was all the lessons learned from the workshop with Chris. And then really there's more details on the doc below. So definitely click that link in the description. Get my full Google Doc of notes. You can have it free, and there's more nuance to what I shared today. But I really hope you enjoyed this. And as to if this workshop was worth it, it was absolutely worth it. I would have paid 3 times what I paid to join it, because really like out of everything I shared, any one of those tips I shared today and any one of those things that I learned, could be worth thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars if applied over time, right? That's why I love going to these events, and that's why I love surrounding myself with, experts, coaches, consultants, because you can just learn one thing that makes the whole experience worth it. And then, when you have knowledge, you hold on to it forever, right? Like no one can take that away from you. That's why I love investing in skills and knowledge and more, because you literally hold on to that forever. It's an appreciating asset. But other than that, I also love going to these events because you just meet a lot of people, right? Like I'm going to Dominican Republic next week for Onyx and Gal's Mastermind. We do 3 events a year, and I go to all of them. And that one I paid, a lot of money to be in. That's like $20K plus as a yearly fee, but completely worth it. And not just because of the knowledge, but also because of the people you meet, right? Like one deal, one partnership, one collaboration can easily make that worth it. And for me, I've already got my ROI back. So yeah, I wanted to just make this video because I think it's really important to go out to events and masterminds and just really get out and meet people, because for me, I feel very isolated sometimes as an entrepreneur because, like ultimately it's us behind our computer screens for like all of the day, right? And I live out in Vietnam. I moved out to do the digital nomad thing, so it's even more isolating for me. But I find like going to events and just getting in rooms with the right people, yes, it's great because I learn a lot and I make some great connections, but also I just get to kind of like be motivated and energized by meeting people that are playing at higher levels than me, thinking big, and just sharing ideas and kind of just being around that energy, right? So definitely go out and meet people. Go to an event in your industry. I highly recommend it. And hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you enjoyed this breakdown, and I'll see you on the next one. Definitely make sure to grab the notes below and subscribe for more content like this.
Hey, I'm AJ Quesada, co-founder of Revenue Boost. Really hope you enjoyed today's video. If you do, make sure to leave me a comment and definitely subscribe right now so that you're notified of all the cool stuff we're doing, all the cool tactics, tips, and strategies that we share here on the channel. We help B2B companies scale to 7 to 8 figures. We've helped over 400 clients, and we can help you too. And we share some amazing stuff on the channel here. So really hope you enjoyed. And if you do, let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe. All right, back to the video.